Now, his forthcoming monograph obviously exemplifies the distinctive virtues of his work on Kant more generally. Like his previous work, it's well-researched and historically informed. What I like perhaps most uniquely about Jens is the extent to which he tries to draw Anglophone readers into his interpretive work directly. I feel instead of condescended to, rather invited into his process. And I find that very, very valuable. So thank you, Jens, for that. His explication of the idea that Kant refers to as Theilnehmung, I'll try not to say that too much, is the foremost example of this virtue in his newest work. In Mary Gregor's translation of the Doctrine of Virtue, this term is replaced by the English word sympathy, a choice that arguably obscures the status of Theilnehmung as a human activity. Timmermann observes that this word is etymologically unrelated to other Latin and Greek words commonly thought to be equivalent to sympathy and used elsewhere by Kant. Rather, Theilnehmung is derived from a verb usually translated as to take part, participate, or share. Following Seymour Fahmy, Timmermann elects to translate this term to sympathetic participation in Kant's key discussions in section 34 and 35. This choice and Timmermann's associated explanation prepare the reader to appreciate his illuminating and I think largely persuasive reading of these key passages explicating Theilnehmung's status as one of Kant's three duties of love. I'm going to undertake to vindicate Timmermann's proposed account of our duty of Theilnehmung with perhaps one or two friendly amendments in two ways. First, I'll defend the account as consistent with the systematic requirements of Kant's structure of wide duties. I'll endeavor to show that Timmermann's Theilnehmung is both clearly distinguishable from Kant's other wide duties of love, yet capable of joining them to form a complete set. Then I'll undertake to show that a plausible account of Schadenfreude, one of Kant's three corresponding vices of hatred, can be successfully generated by inverting Timmermann's Theilnehmung. Indeed, the exercise indicates that Timmermann's new insights could shed fresh light on the nature of Schadenfreude. Okay, so Kant's discussions of sympathetic participation are not models of clarity, and Timmermann attempts to lead the reader through those in great detail. I'm not going to recapitulate his exegetical analysis, but rather I'm going to just try to directly summarize what I take to be his considered view about the nature of sympathetic participation. Now, sympathetic participation can be understood either passively or actively. Either type will generally and naturally result in our having sympathetic sentiments, those sentiments that mirror the sentiments of those with whom we engage. Now, Timmermann points out that even passive sympathetic participation has a cognitive element. To share in another person's feelings, we must imagine ourselves in that person's shoes. But we don't freely choose to sympathize passively, and therefore it can't possibly be a duty. Moreover, if we don't strive to maintain a state of equanimity, passive sympathetic participation can undermine our agency by tempting us to violate our perfect duties, or even by overwhelming our rational faculties altogether. Now, this slide shows a number of probably legitimate and theoretically consistent roles that our resulting sympathetic sentiments can play in practical reason, and especially in the exercise of beneficence. I'm not actually going to go into those because Sebastian has already done such a good job of delving into that part of Jens's work. So instead, I'm going to focus on the activity of sympathetic participation, not the sentiments. And specifically on Timmermann's defense of its non-instrumental value, which it presumably needs to have in order to amount to a duty in general, or a duty as such, which Kant obviously suggests that it is. Active sympathetic participation is what Kant is referring to when he refers to our duty of practical humaneness on Timmermann's interpretation. It's one of our 3 wide duties of love. And of course, in order to understand what it is, we need to set aside what it is not. It is not feeling itself, which cannot be a duty, nor is it simply equivalent or coterminous with active and practical benevolence, because that would not make sense of the distinction that Kant wants to draw or justify its separate place in Kant's tripartite division of the duties of beneficence. Timmermann ultimately proposes that active sympathetic participation is a specific kind of active and practical benevolence, or at least that's what I take him to be saying. In other words, that active sympathetic participation is a specific way of pursuing the ends of others. Timmermann proposes that ASP, as you might abbreviate it, consists first in rational engagement with others in order to see the world from their perspectives, which will help us to feel as they feel. Our resulting sympathetic feelings can then both prompt and inform deliberations about whether we can do anything to help them, and if so, what we ought to do. Practical deliberation is an essential part of ASP, Timmermann maintains, because the deliberative phase or aspect is what makes ASP properly active and therefore plausibly a species of virtuous conduct in and of itself. I think with a few charitable clarifications and inferences, Timmermann's proposed account can make sense of Kant's claim that we have a duty to visit poor, sick, and imprisoned people, despite the painful sympathetic feelings that inevitably arise from such visits. On his view, we have a duty to make visits of this type because they are specific examples of ASP. When we visit people in difficult circumstances, we engage with them to better understand their perspectives. And in that process, we naturally come to share their feelings to at least some extent. Our resulting feelings prompt us to consider ways in which we might be able to help. And they also have epistemic and heuristic value in our resulting deliberative process about how we might help, which Timmermann emphasizes is integral to ASP. What I mean is that the deliberative process itself is integral to ASP. Importantly, Timmermann maintains that we have completed a virtuous action at this point. We have successfully participated in the lives of others, even if our practical deliberations lead us to believe that we can do nothing further to assist those we visit. Now, this last claim can seem counterintuitive because it's easily misunderstood. After all, we don't usually think it is virtuous to just consider helping others. Suppose my sympathetic feelings prompt me to consult the webpage of a humanitarian relief organization, and I judge that making a contribution would be a beneficent action. If I nonetheless decide to hold on to my money, I think it would be misguided to imagine that I deserve partial credit just for undertaking the deliberative process that culminated in my selfish decision not to act. But this is importantly different from the scenario Timmermann envisions, a deliberative process that amounts to a committed but unsuccessful search for a solution to someone else's problem. Now, such an effort could be seen as a benevolent action akin to, for example, an unsuccessful physical search for a neighbor's lost pet. But notice that the physical search analogy, while intuitively appealing, evaluates the second phase of ASP in isolation. Because it ignores the first phase of ASP and the connection between the two, this analogy cannot show us that ASP, as the unitary undertaking that Timmermann conceives of it, is, as such, our duty. Nor can it help us come to grips with what makes ASP so distinctive that it constitutes a separate category within Kant's division of the duties of love. To see this, we need to assess the implications of Timmermann's account for the duties of love in relation to each other. And I'm going to endeavor to do that now. Kant uses the term love here to refer to what he calls practical love. The duty of love is a wide duty to make others' ends my own, provided only that these are not immoral. Kant divides this duty into parts: beneficence, gratitude, and of course, Theilnehmung, or sympathetic participation. As was the case with Theilnehmung, Kant's other two duties of wide duties of love, are closely associated with passive emotional faculties that cannot themselves be considered duties. Timmermann understands beneficence here as the end that we are under a duty to have, the happiness of others. Importantly, the happiness of others must be understood in terms of the actual permissible ends of others, not in terms of others' emotional states, or in terms of what we imagine our own ends would be in their circumstances. Our duty of beneficence obligates us to be actively benevolent, if possible, in Timmermann's terms. Active benevolence involves acting on maxims that aim at beneficent ends. If we have done so, we have engaged in a virtuous action, even if our efforts do not meet with success. Like all the duties of love, active benevolence is naturally related to a responsive feeling, gratification in the happiness or well-being of others. Passive benevolence can be distinguished from passive sympathetic participation in this way. The former is a feeling of pleasure in response to learning that another has attained her end, whereas the latter mirrors another's emotional state, whatever it may be. Whilst those who attain their ends are naturally disposed to experience pleasure in their success, this pleasure can be mixed with pain for various reasons. Kant's conception of happiness is, of course, quite distinct from his conception of pleasure. In his discussion of beneficence, Kant also mentions an interstitial case between active benevolence and mere responsive feelings of satisfaction, the benevolence of wishing with regard to others. This proves important. Kant wryly observes that such well-wishing costs us nothing, but he nonetheless seems to suggest that it is an aspect of our duty, specifically the very least that our duty of beneficence can demand of us at any given time. When he asks how it is that for those of us with the requisite means, our duty, quote, can also be practical. Benevolence of wishing can be understood as a species of moral wish, akin to our wish for the highest good. Such a wish is grounded in respect for law and constitutes the notional adoption of an end that we lack the means to pursue. When Kant elsewhere cautions against the moral arrogance of taking one's own mere wishes for proofs of a good heart in the absence of deeds, I think Kant means to suggest that if we reliably fail to take advantage of opportunities to actually advance our obligatory ends, our wishes with respect to those ends are not sincerely held, but are merely a phantom product of self-deception regarding the nature of the ends to which we truly are committed. By contrast, mere heartfelt benevolence without physical consequences, Kant says, deserves the name of a duty of virtue, when more pragmatic assistance is not possible. I want to say that Kant's duty of gratitude has a similar structure and plays a distinctive role in Kant's trifecta of love. Gratitude is reverence for a person because of a benefit we have been rendered. Kant stipulates that reverence is a judgment of positive high regard rather than a feeling. Reverence should therefore be distinguished from respect, which Kant identifies as the feeling bound up with this judgment. Unlike the passive experience of a feeling, a judgment of positive high regard is a commitment that Kant believes that we can be obliged to make. Kant likens this affect of gratitude to mere heartfelt benevolence, the similarly infertile yet obligatory form of beneficence. As Kate Moran has suggested, just as the latter is the very least that we can be expected to do in accordance with our duty of beneficence, the former is the very least that can be expected of us in accordance with our duty of gratitude. If our circumstances permit, however, our duty of gratitude will also extend to active gratitude, the least degree of which, Kant says, is to render equal services to the benefactor if he can receive them, if he is still living, or to others. As a wide duty of love, our duty of gratitude must have some specific obligatory end at its heart. But Kant's discussion of gratitude frustratingly omits any clear statement on this point. Fortunately, Huston Smith and Mark Timmins valuably cleared the way for an answer to this question by examining Kant's remarks about the corresponding vice of ingratitude. For Kant, ingratitude can be traced to a misunderstanding of the inequality generated by beneficent acts. We will be ungrateful if we believe that another's beneficence demonstrates our own moral inferiority. But such a misunderstanding depends on a sort of fatalism regarding our own moral qualities. It will not arise if we are committed to the project of our own moral perfection, which is Kant's fundamental positive duty to oneself, according to Smith and Timmins. I think that's right. Based on the exegetical work of Smith, Timmins, and Moran, and also on the systematic features of Kant's practical philosophy, I'm cautiously inclined to think that our own moral perfection is the obligatory end that grounds our duty of gratitude. My personal commitment to being a beneficent person myself just is a commitment to the view that beneficence is a human quality worthy of respect. If the foregoing is correct, then Timmermann's Theilnehmung, beneficence, and also gratitude can be understood as a coherent tripartite division of a unitary duty of love. We're now in a position to see how Timmermann's account of our duty of Theilnehmung could successfully complete a coherent taxonomy of the wide duties of love. Active sympathetic participation is best understood as the taking up of the ends of others. In other words, freely partaking of those ends in community with those others. This is what must be done in accordance with the obligatory end of bringing about the kingdom of ends, understood as a moral community. Practical love, then, has three essential components, none of which are possible in the absence of the others. To be in moral community with others just is the mutual sharing of ends, the fullest realization of which necessarily encompasses taking up others' ends, my own moral perfection, and my beneficent conduct. Timmermann's reconstruction of Kant's argument in sections 34 and 35 amounts to a persuasive step-by-step description of what constitutes the virtuous deed of taking up the ends of others, of joining in moral community with them. About an hour ago, Jens glossed this as an activity as perspective taking, and I think that comes very, very close to what I'm trying to say here when I talk about joining in moral community with others. Now, in certain circumstances, we may be unable to seek the company of others in order to see the world from their perspective and partake in their ends. For example, perhaps we ourselves are in prison or too sick to go visiting. In those circumstances, our duty minimally requires that we at least wish to adopt others' ends as our own. At a minimum, a person with a credible wish of this sort will not evade opportunities to join in moral community with others on the basis of the painful feelings that may arise. Moreover, the context of the role that ASP plays in the division of the duties of love supports Timmermann's conclusion. The practical deliberation from the standpoint of others already counts as complete success in this particular sphere of duty, which does not extend to cover subsequent benevolent activity. Practical deliberation is part and parcel of taking up the ends of others. Benevolent activity in furtherance of others' ends is its own related wide duty of love. Okay, let's see. Okay, sorry about that, guys. So I'd like to suggest that, that Timmermann has the right account and that looking at the tripartite duties of love demonstrates the plausibility of his account, makes it more persuasive, certainly to me. I would like to offer a friendly amendment only with respect to Jens's apparent understanding of how this duty relates specifically to the duty of beneficence or active benevolence. I think Timmermann is right that this could plausibly be seen as a kind of active and practical benevolence, but I don't think that characterization best captures the distinctive feature of ASP that makes it a separate category in Kant's tripartite division of love. Rather, ASP, as Timmermann has correctly described it, is the duty to enter into moral community with others. As such, it can be distinct, both from our duty to judge practical love as morally valuable, that is gratitude, and also distinct from our duty to advance others' ends, that is beneficence. It's a further consideration, at least perhaps, in favor of Timmermann's account of ASP and its associated place in the pantheon of our duties to love, that intriguing parallels seem to arise between these duties, our duties of right, and our duties of respect, parallels that seem to track the categories of unity, plurality, and totality. I'm honestly not sure whether the speculative claim on this slide is overly ambitious or completely banal. Surely it's the case that any duty type, narrow, wide, perfect, imperfect, negative, or positive, can be thought of in terms of the three loci of moral value from the practical standpoint: myself, others, and we together. I'd love to be pointed to whatever work is already out there that directly engages with this claim about divisions of duties. I now turn to the task of using Timmermann's Theilnehmung to generate a corresponding account of Schadenfreude. Negation alone will not yield this account, for Kant is careful to distinguish hatred from mere lack of virtue that he describes as solipsism, indifference arising from a self-seeking lack of concern for the fortunes of others. If our duty of practical love as a whole is the duty to share others' ends, then the vice of hatred as a whole must be constituted by the deliberate having of diametrically opposed ends. As he did with duties of love, Kant offers a tripartite division of duties of hatred into envy, ingratitude, and Schadenfreude, which Timmermann translates as malicious glee. I have suggested previously that Timmermann's account of Theilnehmung as ASP is consistent with a specific role in the tripartite division of practical love, the conscious adoption or taking up of the ends of others. This aspect of our duty of love can be distinguished both from the active pursuit of others' ends, beneficence, and also from the judgment that we are obliged to make concerning the moral value of beneficence towards ourselves, gratitude. The question is whether analogous boundaries could be established for the vice of Schadenfreude, boundaries that can distinguish it from envy and ingratitude, whilst also enabling it to join with them as a complete set. Kant's own description of the vices of hatred are not as helpful in this regard as one might hope, although the role of ingratitude as the inversion of gratitude can be relatively easily discerned. The boundaries between envy and Schadenfreude are less obviously drawn. Envy is, by process of elimination, the inversion of beneficence. Kant first defines envy in terms of the natural feeling associated with it, the propensity to view the well-being of others with distress. The fully realized form of envy is aggravated envy. It occurs when one strikes out into action to encroach on others' well-being. This description does seem to constitute an inversion of active benevolence. Kant then refers somewhat obliquely to a category of envy that falls short of action as merely jealousy. We could understand mere jealousy as wishing for the diminution of the happiness of others, without having and or taking means necessary to bring it about. Timmermann translates Schadenfreude as malicious glee. Kant describes the associated natural feeling as an enhanced sense of self-satisfaction, whether natural or moral. Quote, to feel our own well-being and even our good conduct more strongly in response to others' misfortunes or scandalous conduct. The minimal manifestation of Schadenfreude is to rejoice in such events and hence also to wish for such events to come to pass. Kant seems to be saying that ill wishes can be inferred from deliberate reveling. Since misfortunes and scandalous conduct definitionally constitute failures to attain natural and obligatory ends respectively, this could plausibly be read as an inversion of the passive benevolence that is well-wishing. However, Kant's description of Schadenfreude's active aggravated form is less obviously helpful. It's, quote, going so far as to help bring about ill effects or evil itself. It is this language that requires our careful attention. Aggravated Schadenfreude could easily be understood to include aggravated envy as a subset, if Kant's reference to ill effects were taken to refer to misfortunes, and if his reference to evil itself were taken to refer to scandals. However, I think we have some textual clues that count against this troublesome interpretation of Kant's words, which would obliterate the distinction Kant wants to make between these two vices. Most importantly, Kant writes that aggravated Schadenfreude makes hatred of human beings visible in all its hideousness. He makes no similar claim about the visibility of hatred that manifests as aggravated ingratitude or envy. What is uniquely visible about the hatred that is manifested as aggravated Schadenfreude? I think the answer at least might lie in another nuance of Kant's language. To engage in aggravated Schadenfreude is to helfen. Others, well, to help to bring about ill effects, is what it says. This term suggests that Kant might not be envisioning an individual effort. Rather, I want to speculatively suggest that active Schadenfreude, just like active sympathetic participation, could be about joining with others in a sort of antipathetic community. On this view, Schadenfreude would amount to the deliberate mutual partaking in shared ends that are directly opposed to the ends of others, a sort of intentional bifurcation of a community. Those engaged in active Schadenfreude are conspiring, helping a larger group to deliberate about potential actions that could bring misfortune and or scandal on others. I don't know whether this account of Schadenfreude is Kant's or not, but it has two things going for it. First, it's an accurate inversion of Timmermann's account of Theilnehmung, which means that the plausibility of the two accounts would be mutually reinforcing. Second, it carves out a distinct place for Schadenfreude among the vices of hatred, one that makes comprehensible the three of them conceived of as a complete set. There it is. I'm grateful to be here today, and I regret that I didn't allow you more time to preview my analysis. Where virtue required that I deliver this paper to you over a week ago, I instead exemplified Walmart's famous philosophy of inventory efficiency, known as just-in-time delivery. I'd be inclined to blame poor instrumental reasoning rather than a bad will for my tardiness, but if I tried that, Ken would just point out that I'm morally responsible for that too. So I'll just say that I'm looking forward to your questions, and especially to comments from Corey Horn, who I can only hope will remember Kant's admonition that vengeance belongs only to God. Thank you.